Leaders at the G7 summit have failed to resolve differences on trade policy on the final day of their summit in Quebec. US President Donald Trump said he told the group that the United States required fair access to markets and an end to unfair trade practices. It's unclear whether a communique agreed by all will be released when the meeting ends. Trump is due to leave the meeting early and will miss talks on climate change.
At the top of the list was the issue of trade. Very important subject because the United States has been taken advantage of for decades and decades, and we can't do that anymore. We had extremely productive discussions on the need to have fair and reciprocal, meaning the same. People can't charge us 270%, and we charge them nothing. That doesn't work anymore. I made a lot of statements having to do with clarity. We want and expect other nations to provide fair market access to American exports, and that we will take whatever steps are necessary to protect American industry and workers from unfair foreign trading practices, of which really there are many, but we're getting them straightened out, slowly but surely.
Well, as Trump was leaving the G7 summit, he also spoke out on North Korea, saying he truly believes that Kim Jong-un can transform his country and do something great for his people. But he warned that the upcoming summit in Singapore is a one-time shot.
I feel that Kim Jong-un wants to do something great for his people, and he has that opportunity. And he won't have that opportunity again. It's never going to be there again. So I really believe that he's going to do something very positive for his people, for himself, his family. He's got an opportunity, the likes of which I think almost, if you look into history, very few people have ever had. He can take that nation with those great people and truly make it great. So it's a one-time shot, and I think it's going to work out very well. And that's why I feel positive, because it makes so much sense.
Well, joining me now is Tatiana Anderson, who's at the G7 summit in Quebec City. Tatiana, Trump was the last to arrive at the summit, but we also understand he was showing up late to some of the working sessions. Of course, he's on his way to Singapore now. But did that indicate his disinterest in the whole agenda?
Well, if you listen to what President Trump just had to say, certainly not. He said that there was a lot of headway that has been made here. He says that the relationship between himself and many of the other leaders here at the G7 is at a 10. So according to President Donald Trump, things have gone fine. He might have arrived late. He might be leaving early. But according to him, he's got a lot accomplished. Of course, the major topic here at the G7 this year, trade. And it's something I want to bring in Matthew Bishop on. He is an expert in international politics from the University of Sheffield. And you listened, Matthew, to the president's speech not too long ago. Yep. He talked a lot about trade. We know that French officials have said recently that the U.S. and European nations will be having more trade talks in the next couple of weeks. What does that tell you about what sort of meeting of the minds there was on trade at this year's G7?
Well, I mean, the trade has kind of overshadowed the summit, actually. I mean, the summit was supposed to have 5 broad agendas, really, really ambitious themes, actually, that the Canadian government wanted to discuss. And Trump's tariffs kind of overshadowed that. I think, actually, the European countries and Canada have played a really, really clever game, because what they've done is they've sort of managed Trump, and they've kind of not allowed him to combust. So they've been very clever in kind of letting him talk about all the things he wants to talk about, make his comments about trade, suggest that yes, we can start some talks at some point in the future, whilst not leading to a situation where there's sort of this massive diplomatic crisis, which I think has actually been very clever on their part.
So speaking of diplomatic crises, a lot of politics does have to do with relationships. There's been a lot of reporting about tit for tats between the president and other leaders, negative tweeting, negative comments, but we just heard President Trump say that when it comes to his relationship with some of these leaders, it's a 10, and that the fake news is reporting, of course, the wrong information. Yeah. You've been watching all of this. What's the real deal? Yeah,
well, the real deal is, again, I mean, they've just managed him very, very cleverly. I mean, they could have come in and they could have inside the rooms and been antagonistic towards him. But what does that really achieve? I mean, he's not a normal, rational politician, so the normal rules of diplomacy don't apply. The fact that he does most of his diplomacy by tweet is just really, really unusual and against the rules of normal diplomatic practice. I'm sure he does go away thinking that his relationship with these people is a 10, but my sense is that most of them are hoping that they probably won't have to deal with him for too much longer. I mean, the midterms are coming up in the US in November. Who knows how the Republicans are going to do in those midterms, and that could have implications for just how sort of important Trump is in the back end of next year and beyond. And he'll be a lame duck within a year's time, particularly if it looks like he's really, really struggling in terms of retaining the presidency, I think.
One of the other issues that's been a sort of point of contention here is this communique that's usually issued after a G7 wraps up. There's been reporting that there either might not be a communique at all because leaders can't come to enough of a consensus on these issues, or there might be a communique from the G6 minus the United States. How significant is something like that?
Well, it's extremely significant. I mean, it's not just that the communique is normally issued at the end of the meeting. The communique is normally written before the meeting even starts, and the whole point of the meeting is just to iron out the most contentious issues towards the end. And again, we had these 5 really, really important themes. We had gender, we had jobs for the future, the situation with the oceans and climate change. It's a really ambitious agenda that the Canadians put together, and it's unlikely, I think, that we're going to see anything remotely approaching what they would have hoped for in terms of a communique that could actually say something really meaningful about all of those issues. We may get some kind of communique, but the story I heard this morning is that Trump didn't even want to have the language in it saying that the G7 is about upholding the rules-based international order. He objected to that language, which is crazy, really, because that's exactly what the G7 was established for. I mean, that's what it's supposed to do, is support the international order. So the communique situation is really worrying. Apparently the Sherpas and the diplomats have been up all night trying to find language that can bring the countries together. So it's really troubling. We've actually just written a piece. We had a blog in the Global Policy Journal, which is who we're here working for, talking about this problem of G6+1. It's a real worry because the G6 countries, the 6 minus the US, that are potentially left alone if they isolate Trump. I mean, symbolically, that could be a good thing if they come up with a communique that excludes the US, but in reality it means that the G7 then, as an institution, is called into question.
Well, this is a year that we're seeing things we've never seen happen before. Right. Matthew Bishop, thank you so much for that. And of course, we know that President Trump has left the G7. He's on his way to what he hopes will be a legacy for his presidency, that meeting with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un next week.
Okay, Tatiana Anderson, thank you for that from Quebec City.